I bought newborn clothes for my children and they never wore them because they were chunky. So
Oh my gosh.
there's always a societal pressure to get your kids out and about and learning like baby sign language or like baby yoga.
Welcome to another episode of A Little Bit Richer, brought to you by my friends at Legal & General. Charlotte Jessop from the Looking After Your Pennies platform is here to help us navigate financial planning when it comes to parenthood. Welcome, Charlotte.
Hello.
I'm excited to get into this topic purely because I feel like I have a lot to learn. So we're talking about the topic of parenthood, and becoming a parent is an incredible experience with all the joy and love that it brings. And as a former bundle of joy, I should know that all too well, but it is a very big decision. So I want to ask you, is there ever a right time to have a baby? And what advice do you have for people considering starting or growing their family?
This is a great question. I honestly, from my own personal experience, there's not a right time. I made the decision to be a parent purely from an emotional standpoint rather than a financial one. I got married when I was 26. I can't even remember now. I was 26 when I got married, and I knew that I wanted to start a family pretty much straight away, and that was what I did. A year later, I had my first daughter, and then I had another one 2 years after that. And when I look back at that time when my finances at that time, I'd not long bought a house before that. I just finished, paying for a wedding, and my finances probably weren't like rosy. When I sit down and look at the money I have now, I sit there and think, oh, now I could probably it'd probably be a lot easier now. But I think the reality is that if you sit there and you try and rationalize every decision you're going to make, there's never a right time, because if it's not the finances that are stopping you, it's the things that you enjoy. It's like, oh, I want to travel, and actually, if I take a kid with me, that's going to be hard. Or I want to buy a house, or if I have a kid, then I'll need an extra bedroom. So there will always be something that stands in your way of making that decision to be a parent. So I think you just have to sit down, if that's what you want from your life, and that's really what you see your life looking like in the future. Then try not to wait for perfection. You kind of just got to take a little bit of a leap and figure the rest out on the way.
That's really comforting to hear, because I've been having this conversation with my friends recently, and we're getting to that point where people are starting to drop off. People are starting to have kids and start their families of their own. And a lot of the time it is that, oh, but I'm not here. I'm not where I want to be financially. I haven't done the things I want to achieve. But knowing that there is no right time just kind of gives you that confidence to say, whenever you feel like you want to do it, just do it. Just start growing your family. So that is really good to hear, and to hear your story as well. We've spoken about it before in a podcast about the Legal & General research that reveals some key milestones, like parenthood is being delayed, and the average age of having a baby is later than it ever has been, at 32 years old. So I want to ask you, why do you think that is?
Well, as somebody who has, I had my kids quite young, so I was 27, and now I'm older than that. Now I'm in my mid-30s. I do feel like a different person. I actually think, if I become a mum now, I'd be a slightly different mum. And so, I do think there are some personal development that happens at some point, sort of around when you turn 30. There may be changes, your perspective on life and family and that sort of thing. But also, there are some things that we've already touched on, things like career. Like I was fortunate that I entered a career that allowed me to progress fairly quickly. So I went into teaching, and within sort of a few years of entering the profession, I was already in kind of like middle leadership positions, and I felt that I was in a strong place. That isn't the same for everybody. It can take a few years to find a career that's right for you. Education, more people are going to university, doing postgraduate study as well. So all of those things make a difference. And also when we look at finances, we've had, it's been a rough few years.
It's been rough.
We look at the likes of COVID. Would I have wanted to have started a family in COVID? absolutely not. Like if I'd have been thinking about it at that point, I'd have probably have gone, you know what, let's wait till this settles down a little bit and see what the world looks like. We've also got things like the cost of living crisis, and this has made things more expensive, and people, I think, are, potentially waiting for those sorts of things to maybe settle down. House prices are huge now, so it makes sense for people to want to feel a little bit more secure in their financial situation, but also these personal development milestones. I think, as women, we have more, freedoms. We were able to make bigger and better strides in our careers than my parents and their parents were. So actually, there's a real sense of wanting to take advantage of that, and really pursuing some of those things that are on offer to us now that haven't been for generations before us. So, yeah, I think there's a whole host of reasons, and I completely understand why people would want to delay that. And interesting, like I saw some research the other day that said that actually women who become mothers after the age of like 35, I think it is, actually have I can't remember the exact figures, but something like it significantly improves their chances of living to like 90.
Oh, wow.
And then women that have children over the age of 40 are actually 4 times more likely to live to over 100. So there are some like perks. Well, whether you consider living that long a perk, I don't know. But there are some sort of health benefits as well to potentially delaying children. So it's a really interesting thing to think about.
I think there is such a big shift between generations. Like if you just take my parents versus me. So my parents had me at 24. I'm 26. And I cannot even fathom having a child right now because, where I am in my career and the things I want to achieve. So there is more of that lean towards, that stat that we saw, 32. That's probably where I'm more aiming for. So there is that push, and around my friendship group as well, everyone's kind of thinking a bit like 30s onwards is when I'm going to consider doing that, because everyone wants to focus on their careers. And I think we have more opportunities now. Like you said, not people want to focus, especially women want to focus on reaching a certain point before they kind of take that time out and have kids. So it's I think it's a different world that we're living in.
I think my parents, their education was more college based. So once they'd left school, they went to college, and I think that, most of their formal education was done at sort of like 18, 19 years old. Whereas my formal education didn't finish until I was 23. So that's a whole 5 years on. So if I look at, you say your parents were, 24 when they had you, if you added 5-6 years on top of that, then you are looking at closer to 30. So there's been changes in society, particularly around our careers and education and things like that, that it almost makes sense for us to want to delay it just so that we can achieve our, personal and, professional milestones.
Absolutely. So let's talk about finances then. Our favourite topic to talk about. So as a parent yourself, can you talk us through some of the financial impacts of having a baby? So more so the short-term costs when they're younger. What are some of the costs that we can expect when you have a baby?
Yeah, so I think this is what most people focus on. You're like, I'm having a baby. And, you kind of get very caught up in this bit. And actually, it's kind of fleeting. So the initial costs you have a baby that you need to feed, clothe, transport. So they are going to need some clothes, and they are going to rapidly grow out of those clothes as well. So I always urge people to go secondhand for things that are particularly like those newborn clothes, because it could be a week and then they're done.
As quick as that?
I bought newborn clothes for my children and they never wore them because they were chunky. So
oh my gosh.
So I had like all these brand new clothes that I was just like, oh, okay, let's move those along. So clothes is obviously a main one, but lots of people buy that for you. It's like their number one thing to buy. You need things like car seats. So you legally, if you're going to put your kid in a car, they got to have the right car seat. And that's probably one of the few costs that you can't really avoid, because it's recommended that you buy those sorts of things brand new so that you know that they haven't been in accidents and stuff like that. Then you have to get this kid out and about. So, you might want some sort of like push chair, or I was quite a fan of like, baby wrapping. I just keep my kid like on my chest and feed them like crisps and things over the top. So, you need something like that. So those can again be quite expensive. And then, you have things like feeding. So, depending on how you choose to feed your child, you might have costs involved there. And then there's things like nappies and, all of these sorts of things. And whether you choose to go down a kind of like a disposable nappy route or a reusable nappy route, both of those things involve costs. On top of that, you're then going to want to do stuff with your kid, and there's always a societal pressure to get your kids out and about and learning like baby sign language or like baby yoga. These are all things that I did with my children. I look at it now and I'm like, why on earth did they think like they could do yoga when they were like 3 months old? But a lot of this is about socializing, and that's hugely important as a new parent, to just get out and meet other mums and that sort of thing. So those are costs as well. And as they get older, you then enter into things like the school years, and nursery and that sort of thing. And then there's I think a significant proportion of the costs of having a child is around childcare. So even if you take 6 months, a year off after you've had a child, you are going to at some point pay out for childcare. And there are ways that you can negate this or reduce this in some way, but that is a significant cost that I think is probably, going back to the previous question, a huge factor in why people are choosing to delay parenthood, because childcare costs are significant. And even after that, when you send them off to school, like I look at my kids now, I basically need to just redirect my salary to the school's bank account, because it's Christmas jumper day.
Oh, yes.
It's anti-bullying week and they got to wear yellow socks.
I used to love that at school though. Mum, give me a pound.
Yeah,
I used to love it.
Yeah, there's always a new thing. They've had a school photo, and you couldn't possibly not get that photo because they're not smiling. So you still have to pay for all of those things. And it's always something. There's a school trip. My eldest daughter has recently signed up to rock band lessons.
Wow.
So that's where my salary is
being directed.
Going. So if she's not a rock star in the next 20 years...
I want to see her on the charts.
Yeah.
She has to be on the charts.
She's going to be writing me a check because I want that money back.
She's going to be working. She'll be doing the dishes every day until she makes that back.
Yep. Yep, that's it.
Wow, the costs really do add up.
Absolutely.
So my big experience when it comes to kids and the costs is I looked after my godson, who's 18 months, for the weekend. Long time for me, FYI. No kids. The most I've done is hug the kid and hand them back to their mum.
You're doing a great job.
Thank you. 3 days.
Yeah,
3 days I looked after my godson. And I took him out, obviously honorary, took him out, took him soft play and everything, and did all the things that I assume parents do. And I was really shocked at how much the prices can rack up. And that was a weekend, and obviously his parents gave me a lot of things. I had nappies and everything, so I wasn't buying a lot. But just the things that I was paying for, and the things that I heard that they had paid for to be able to, give to me so I didn't have to pay for stuff. I was like, wow, this is a lot of money. So it can really rack up. But I don't think that should be a reason to not have kids. I don't want to scare anyone listening. It's just being aware, You'd rather know than go into something and have no idea. So I think that's all we're trying to do. Just bring awareness to it, but don't let that be a reason to not pursue the joy that is parenthood.
And yes, they might need nappies, but again, that's not a huge expense. My children, when they were little, were so cheap. That I used to be able to pop out to a restaurant and just give them a couple of chips off my plate. Yeah. And now they're older, they're like,
they want their own plate.
I need an adult-sized meal. And I'm like, well, this is why we're going home.
Yeah. This is why we don't go out.
Yeah, exactly.
You eat too much.
It's going to be rice.
That's it. Okay, so we've been talking about short-term costs. Now, let's look at the longer-term costs of actually raising children. So what are some of the considerations longer-term that people should be thinking about? Yeah,
so I think there's obviously the costs that seem obvious to us. And, we've covered most of those off, apart from... if you look at maybe the teenage years, you've got things like, they're going to want an iPhone, and they want to, go out and socialise with their friends, and then potentially, further education, and if you're going to contribute to that. But those costs are kind of easy to see. What we need to maybe talk about here is the things that are not so obvious. And this is things like the cost of being on maternity leave. And so that was a reduction for me, a quite a significant reduction in my salary, just to take that time off to spend with my children in those, early, weeks and months. But then that also then impacts longer term as well. So then we start seeing, it's at that point where, women become mothers that we start seeing bigger gaps in things like gender pay gap. We start seeing, pension gaps, savings gaps. It's that point, basically we don't see a huge difference in these things until we get to that point where, women start having babies, and that's when we start seeing the divide between the two. So we need to be considering the implications of this in our choice around having parenting, and putting things in place to make sure that we are kind of offsetting or working to ensure that there's not the kind of a longer term damage on those things. And that can be hard. It's not something I definitely wasn't 26 years old and expecting my first child going, we really must talk about the pension gap. That wasn't something that I was thinking about. But, being able to do this and raise awareness of these things means that maybe we can bring to light some of these conversations, and people can start making changes towards their finances. So you can do things like pay into your pension while you're on maternity leave. And I did this, and it sort of happened accidentally, but I'm grateful that it did. But, it doesn't necessarily end at mat leave. It can be like, what happens in terms of who's going to look after the children? Is it going to be that one parent goes part-time? Is it, or quits work entirely, and you then go down to like a single income household? What are the costs of that? But also, what are the risks of that? Because if you're a single income household, then, your finances are a lot more precarious than a double income household. And some of these conversations need to be had, particularly if you've got a partner that you're going on this journey with, how do you build back in that security, and how do you build back in that equity in your in that sort of financial partnership? So those costs are not easy to see, but they are still there, and I think we're hearing more and more about them now, and I'm pleased to see it, because it wasn't a conversation that I was having 10 years ago when I started my parenting journey. But I'm so glad that we are talking about these things now, and actually factoring them into our decisions around parenting and how we're going to manage that. I guess the other thing to say on this is it's not all financial. There are, my mental workload has increased significantly since having children, and when you think about mental health, that additional, it's just, I need a PA to manage the emails from my kids' school, because there's about 30 a day. But that creates a toll, and and it might be that has an impact on some of the other things that I'm able to do, whether it's a hobby or whether it's paid work, because those sorts of things take up time.
I agree. I think it's good that we're having these conversations. We've definitely touched on it on the podcast before, bringing light to the different gaps, like you said, because as women, we need to be aware and kind of plan for that. So Charlotte, can you give any tips for blending parenthood and your career?
Yes, this is an interesting one, isn't it? Because for me, on a personal level, I'm like hugely career driven and ambitious, but also I love being a parent, so I have to find a way to make both of these things work for me. And it's been a journey, and it hasn't always been easy, and there's definitely been moments where I've had to choose one over the other, and there's always a sense of guilt and that sort of thing about it. But some of the things that I have done that have made a difference are there and available to other people as well. So I would say, like, lean on your village. And, we talked about, those baby classes where you're doing baby sign language and it all feels pointless. Well, those people turned into my village. They are the people, I took my eldest daughter to baby sign language class, and the woman that sat next to me is now one of my best friends. Her son goes to school with my daughter. They have been in the same classes throughout. She lives around the corner from me, and she will be like, can I drop my kids off at your house and can you take them to school for me today? And I'll be like, yeah, no problem. I'm going that way anyway. And then the next day I'll be like, do you mind picking up my kid because I'm a bit late coming back from work? And these people just make the whole thing work. And this can be friends, this can be family. And the reality is that you might feel like it's, not, I don't know, you might feel bad for taking advantage of them. But the reality is, if they asked you, they would, you do the same thing for them. So, it's taken me a bit of time to get to the point where I'm like, you know what, I'm just going to ask, because I know that I would do the same back for them. And having that village, having that group of people around you that you can call upon really does make a huge difference to the whole experience of having kids. I think the other thing to think about is just to think creatively about your options. And we mentioned about the cost of childcare, and this is huge. And actually my ex-husband and I, when we had little kids, we made the decision to both work part-time rather than pay for childcare. And the benefit of this was that meant that not only did our kids have a parent with them at all times, but also by working part-time, we actually earned more money because we were paying less tax due to things like tax allowances than if one of us had worked full-time. So I think I worked it out. This was quite a long time ago now, so forgive me if these numbers are inaccurate, but I worked 40% of the week, so I worked 2 days a week, but I was taking home something like 70% of my full-time earnings, just because when you factored in things like a reduction in, like I say, tax allowances, I made less student loan payments, I made less pensions contributions, and all these things need to be considered. But in that 1 year window, actually we were bringing in more money by having us both part-time than by having one of us not working. So sometimes these creative solutions are worth looking into, and it's going to be different for every parent, but try not to just be like, it's childcare or nothing, like there might be another solution.
There are other creative
out there.
ways that you can kind of make things work, which is
Absolutely.
good. It's good to hear, and it kind of it gets you thinking about different ways that you can make it work for your situation. So that's really good.
Yeah.
Before we wrap up this episode, I want to ask you, what are your top 3 tips if you'd like to have a child in the future? So,
first one, don't go overboard on the baby stuffs, because they can be really cheap. And like I say, I've already mentioned, they don't need loads of things. I made some choices on my parenting journey that meant that I actually kept my kids quite cheap, at least in the early days. And even now, I look at what my kids need. Like, the thing is, you love these kids. You love them and you want them to have all the best stuff. But ultimately, they don't need like fancy trainers that cost you like 200 quid. Particularly when they're 7 years old, they don't know. So you can just get them, cheap ones, and they can run through muddy puddles and live their best lives like that. So don't go overboard on the baby stuff. And just kind of keep those costs in check. As exciting as it is, don't. The next one, and this this might be my favourite tip, is to choose your career wisely. And I say that, I'm not turning people away from, following their career dreams. But if you can make choices about the job that you're in prior to entering the journey of parenthood, it can make or break the experience. So I'm talking about things like, does the company you're working for, what is their mat leave like? I was fortunate, I was in teaching, it wasn't too bad. But I know my sister, she works in the private sector. She had a far better maternity leave deal than I did working, in a state secondary school. That will make a difference to the amount of money you have in those early days. Things like, what are, the pensions like in that job? Are you getting a good pension out of that job? And things like remote working. All of this is going to impact on your experience, not only during the sort of the parenting years, but onwards. And I think if you can be in the right place with your career, and you're in a job that you love and has flexibility, it can literally be a game changer for the whole experience. And then the last one is work on your money stuff before you have a kid. So, this can mean doing things like, increasing your pensions contributions. It can be things like paying off debt. It can be things like, overpaying your mortgage. And the benefit of this is twofold. Not only do you get the benefits of, increased pension and, less mortgage and stuff like that, but you also get used to having less money. So when you're making those extra contributions, you get all of those perks. And then, when baby comes along and you start your family, you can stop doing those things and kind of offset that money towards, starting your family. And you'll be in a stronger place for it. And, you won't miss the cash when baby comes along, because it was already
gone, already allocated.
Yeah. So I think if you can do that, and it's always going to be a fine balance. When do we stop doing all that money stuff, and when do we start having a kid? But essentially, if there's something you want to do, you got to take the plunge eventually.
You have to take the plunge if you want to achieve it.
Yep.
Charlotte, thank you so much. This has been such an insightful episode, especially as me, who doesn't have kids yet but wants kids in the future. This has been a reassuring and informative episode. So thank you so much for coming onto the podcast.
Thank you.